How's everyone doing? Welcome back to Lakers Latest. We're going to talk all things Lakers. Coming to you from Studio City, as always, Los Angeles, California, on a Monday. I believe it is August 18th, 2025. I hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. Hope you got whatever you needed to do. Hope you had fun, went to the beach, went out, went hiking, went out for drinks, whatever you need to do. Hope everyone had a good time. Like I said, I think I was at the Chargers Rams game. It was interesting. First time I've been to SoFi, so that was fun. But yeah, I hope everyone had a good time. Stayed cool. Obviously, it's gonna be hot all summer, but yeah, let's hop right into it. I saw an article on Bleacher Report that said LeBron, it's just more LeBron trade rumors, more stuff about him potentially leaving the Lakers. Right now, it seems like there's really nothing that's expected before the regular season. He's going to be a Laker. But it said depending on how the Lakers season could go, obviously whether they get off to a good start, whether they're kind of treading water, maybe not performing up to expectations, or hopefully they perform over expectations. But basically, the essentially idea is that if maybe they're kind of in that middle ground by the time the trade deadline comes, that there could be a significant increased interest in acquiring LeBron James. Now, this is Bleacher Report, so you have to take everything with a grain of salt. They're usually, I'm not gonna lie, they're usually pretty horrendous. Very like engagement farming type thing. But it's not surprising to see that because I think naturally, if obviously they weren't doing good, they would look to potentially moving LeBron. So it's not necessarily surprising to see that, but obviously he's not going anywhere unless something like that happened. Now, he did point out that obviously, if we get to the deadline, which will be that first or second week of February, he was kind of speculating on teams that could be interested in him. He put out the two other teams that he's obviously already played for, which are the Miami Heat and the Cleveland Cavaliers. I talked, I think maybe last week about the idea about him going back to the Cavs. It just doesn't really make sense for me. Like, obviously he could compete for a championship there, but for me, when I look at LeBron, legacy is an important thing, and I just don't really see what going to Cleveland accomplishes for his legacy, even if he wins another championship there, which I don't even know if he would. I just don't see what something like that accomplishes for his legacy. If he were to get traded, I think it needs to do something that could potentially elevate his legacy. I don't know, maybe he goes to Dallas, maybe he goes to Knicks and helps them win a championship for the first time in 50 years. Again, I don't think that's going to happen. Especially a team like the Knicks, it doesn't really make sense for them to trade for LeBron when they have this 3 to 5 year window. But it's not surprising to see that. I think you'd be like, what team could acquire LeBron? The other thing is at this point, given the fact that basically no one has salary cap aside from garbage teams like the Nets, I think maybe the Pelicans do. I'm not sure of that, but there's only so many teams that can absorb a big contract as a third team. So really, if you are going to do a 2-team trade, you're going to have to match the salaries, and that's LeBron makes $52 million this year, so you're going to be trading players of value. So it's still hard for me to actually see anyone trying to trade for LeBron unless they're really going all out, because you're going to have to trade probably multiple players of value, give up a first-round pick for a guy that might only be with you for half a season. Nevertheless, it's still interesting to see a report come out like that at this point in the offseason. Obviously, the trade deadline is 5-6 months away. The season hasn't even started, so we can't really speculate on how they're going to be at the deadline. We can speculate on if they're not doing great, would they look into trading him again? It just seems like a bunch of words to me. I think it would just be so difficult to trade LeBron because of the salary, because people aren't going to want to give up anything too much of a legitimate assets, even first round picks. You don't want to trade unless you are really going for it and he could be the piece that finishes. You don't want to trade a 2029 unprotected pick or 2030 or even top 10 protected for a guy that could be only there for half a season, even with that guy being LeBron James, arguably the greatest players ever lived. So something to keep an eye on. Obviously, we'll see what happens at the deadline. But yeah, gonna pop in the next thing, which is Dan Hurley. Now, obviously, there was this big back and forth between Dan Hurley and the Lakers last summer. It was a whole, are you going to offer me this? Is it going to be how much money? How many years? There was a point where he was definitely the leading candidate where a ton of people thought that he was going to accept the Lakers job. I think we know he was offered it. But in the end, he decided to go back to UConn, where he obviously got a massive extension as well, given the fact that they won 2 national championships in the past 3 seasons. So it was interesting hearing back the past week about Hurley. I can't remember where he talked about this, but basically said that his father, who is legendary basketball coach in the high school ranks in New Jersey, just one of those legendary coaches, even though obviously he wasn't a college coach, NBA coach, just a legend in New Jersey, legendary coach. Obviously, his two, Bobby Hurley, Danny Hurley. So you take his word. His word does mean something. So it was definitely interesting to see him say that, his dad wanted him to take that Lakers job. I think it's interesting looking back at it now, like objectively. If you had a chance, would you have rather the Lakers hire Dan Hurley, or are you happy with how JJ Redick has done? Now, to me, I like JJ. I've always liked JJ. I think he did a solid first year. I think the way the season ended in the playoffs was definitely disappointing. I think the regular season saw a lot of good stuff happen, a lot of stuff he needs to probably work on. But again, this was his first year being a legitimate coach, head coach, assistant coach, anything. So I do like JJ. I think it's hard to say going back in it. Would I rather have Dan Hurley? Would I rather have JJ? Obviously, UConn had a disappointing season. But also you won back-to-back championships. You can't really complain about the season they had after winning back-to-back championships. But nevertheless, it's just interesting to see him talking about that. That obviously his dad was like, you should go take that. This is your time to jump to the NBA. Hurley obviously wanted to stay in college. I know there was a lot of talk about him potentially wanting the Knicks job. That was the job that he could potentially wait for. So it's interesting to see the fact that job that we heard that he was potentially waiting for immediately became available the following offseason. And either he didn't want it or the Knicks weren't interested in pursuing him. Obviously, maybe the fact that he got a huge extension. But nevertheless, it's just interesting to hear him talk about it. I think, I can't really say, like, would I rather have Dan Hurley than JJ Redick? Like, maybe he's a 2-time championship coach, but at the same time, NBA is different than college. There's a lot of things I like about JJ. I'm excited to see how he does in his second season. So yeah, we'll see what happens. I don't know if I definitively can say, yeah, okay, maybe I would rather have Dan Hurley than JJ Redick, but who knows how the first year would went. I think JJ is a highly knowledgeable basketball mind. I'm happy to have him, and I am very excited to see how he does in year 2 and how he does with all the new pieces. So yeah, I just found that interesting that, his dad, who's just a legend, wanted him to take that job. It seems like he really thought this is the time, you won back-to-back championships in college. This is the time to jump to the NBA. So just an interesting tidbit. I do think he'll probably make that jump at some point, but, who knows when that will be. But I'm think we're happy with JJ and excited to see how he does, specifically in year 2. All right, so now I want to talk about Dalton Connect a little bit. So I've definitely talked about him throughout the summer. Where does he stand on the roster? How do he play in Summer League? What's his trade value? So right now, I think he's kind of, to me, the biggest question mark on the Lakers roster. I feel like as far as the stars, we know who they are. We know who the top supporting role players are. You look at a guy like DeAndre Ayton. We know how talented he is. It's going to be how does he fit with the team emotionally, mentally? How's the chemistry? So there's definitely a question mark with a guy like him, maybe a couple other guys, but I think Connect is just the biggest question mark on the team right now. Like, we saw a lot of stuff we loved in the rookie year, especially that December where he started. He had 37, hit all those threes, really showed he can be a legitimate NBA player. And then obviously disappointing second half of the season with the Mark Williams non-trade. I talked about it's going to be difficult for anyone to succeed in that situation. But now here we are. It doesn't seem like he's going anywhere. It doesn't seem like he's getting traded. So he's probably the best shooter they have aside from maybe LaRavia on the roster, and he's going to have a spot on this team. At the same time, he's coming off a very disappointing Summer League performance. And off the back of that Summer League performance, we're hearing that his value, especially trade value, is down league-wide. Probably after the regular season, even with his disappointing second half, you probably could get a late first, and now it seems like that's not where you're going to get value from. So to me, like, trading Dalton Connect for second rounders makes no sense. I think he has a higher value, higher ceiling than any potential late second round pick you're going to get. I think you're better off just keeping him and trying to get him to work that out. Obviously, disappointing summer league, which is not what you want to see, especially after he had such a good summer league last year and such a, I would say, solid, albeit a bit down rookie year. Um, but I think he's going to be a key player on this team. How does he fit? He obviously shooter. You need those next to Luka and LeBron. I'm excited to see how he does in the preseason. I still think there's a ton of game he has left that he hasn't had a chance to show. And I think confidence is going to be the biggest thing for him. When he was confident and he was comfortable in December specifically, he was playing great. Showed you could be a real legitimate player in the NBA. And then obviously, even before the trade, it was a little down. But he's an X factor to me. I think he has one thing, which is shooting that they really need. And it's going to be up to him to see how he does for the rest of his team. But he's a big factor on this team to me. And if you can get the best out of him, that's only going to amplify their contender status, having this really solid shooter, guy that can score on his own. So I'm really looking to see how Dalton Connect does in year 3, and especially year 2. And especially based off of Marcus Smart probably coming off the bench, so he'll have more a chance to score. So we'll see what happens. That'll be interesting. So last thing I wanted to touch on, just a couple more trade rumors again. I've talked about how, a lot of these aren't necessarily rumors, but mock trades. So I just saw another mock trade, which was Gabe Vincent, Maxi Kleber to the Suns for Dillon Brooks. I can't remember if there was any picks involved. This is an interesting trade. I think from the Suns' perspective, unless there are picks involved, I don't know why they would do it. With that being said, the reason they probably why would do is because Brooks has a longer contract. These guys would get you out of that cap earlier. Brooks is a guy who would be a good fit for the Lakers. He's kind of a dick. But everyone needs one of those guys on your team that just everyone that goes against him hates. Like, he's kind of a tool, but he could be our tool. You know what I mean? So it's interesting. That would be an interesting trade. I think Brooks obviously isn't a consistent shooter, but he brings that toughness, that kind of like irritability of like anyone that goes against him can't stand him. And like I said, you do have Marcus Smart to do that, but Dillon Brooks would be another type of guy that can do that. So again, it's an interesting potential mock trade. I think it would be good for the Lakers. I don't know why the Suns would do it, but just one I wanted to bring up because I do think a guy like Dillon Brooks could be a good fit for the Lakers. So, and contract-wise, they could easily make it match with guys like Kleber, Vincent, maybe Vanderbilt. So that is one to keep an eye on because that is a guy that I think they could potentially pursue. But we'll see what happens. So, yeah, that's all I got for today, guys. We'll see what happens in the coming weeks and before preseason and training camp. And, yeah, I'll catch you guys after that. But until then, everyone have a good day. Stay cool and